Hey guys. So one of our focuses this week is imagery. Um, so um, just a few things to think about here. Most poems that you are going to encounter are going to include some sort of imagery. I think that's kind of a basic MO for most poetry. Um, the words will oftentimes paint vivid pictures for our minds. Sometimes that's not always going to be easy for us to sense what all those are, but I think you can usually find something. Um, Images are oftentimes going to be tied to our five senses. Um, and a lot of times imagery might be kind of a deceptive title because it makes it sound like it's only visual components. Imagery with our five senses, it can have anything to do with taste, the feel, the smell, the sound. So if we look at like an apple, for instance, we have more association than just to have this, red fruit. It will have kind of a waxy feel, unless, you take a bite and then it can be sticky on the inside. Has a sweet flavor, even just the crunch that an apple makes. You can close your eyes and hear someone take a bite and recognize what fruit they're eating. The smell that an apple has. Okay, all that stuff can tie into vivid images that come into our mind of what an apple is. And poets can do that with other things as well. Okay, um, images are great ways to make concrete ideas become more real for us. Emily Dickinson has a poem, which I think you guys will look at later, where it describes hope as being like a bird. Now, hope is an abstract idea, but to represent it as a bird in this poem is quite unique, and it gives us a different way to think about it. Um, so, just the big thing with imagery is it helps us make a connection to more of the real world and how we experience the world, because that's how we experience it is through our senses. Um, you want to keep in mind that an image itself is not going to be a poem. Um, it's just going to elicit something that we see and feel. Okay, um, and a lot of times, using an image, you guys have heard the expression, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." Oftentimes, because poets have less that they can work with, less space, they'll use an image to convey a meaning or a feeling and hope that it elicits something from you. So that's why a lot of times they won't always express clearly what they mean, or at least I don't want to say clearly, but using images more. Okay, and oftentimes the images are not going to tell you something. It's just a way of expressing something in an unusual way. So let's look at a few examples here. Okay. All images, like symbols, should be concrete. So we've talked about this term, but concrete means it's something that you can perceive with your senses. Okay, you can remember concrete because it's hard, but so we talk about a desk, we talk about oxygen, it could be a person. All these things can be something that we can see and touch and experience in some way. Okay, so again, we live in a physical world. We experience the world through our senses. And a lot of times we understand the world through physical objects that we see. Okay, we make association with objects in our feelings. So, like snow, for instance, we associate with cold. Sand is something that we oftentimes associate with being on a beach and hot. Okay. All right. So let's look at an example. So this is from Ezra Pound. This is a poem called "In a Station of the Metro." And it reads, "The apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bough." Okay, I love this poem. It's very short. You see, it's only 2 lines. "The apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bough." Um, you know, I'll give you a little genesis of this poem, and then we can kind of talk about some of the images and what they convey through this. Ezra Pound wrote this poem after he was exiting the subway in Paris one day. I think he said suddenly he beheld a beautiful face, and then another, and then another. Um, And originally, when he wrote this poem, he was trying to convey it in like about 30 lines, and he just kept trimming and trimming, and it didn't feel right until he came down to this final version, which is just 2 lines. Um, and as you can see here, there's nothing about, being on a subway. There's nothing about, you know, talking specifically about like beautiful faces because of their eyes or whatnot. But what he does is he presents us two images that we're supposed to juxtapose, put side by side. Okay, so the apparition of these faces in the crowd. Okay, petals on a wet black bough. Usually if we think about petals, I think about something pretty like a flower. So I found an image. I don't know if it conveys this perfectly, but um, it's something that stands out to me. Um, I think flowers are meant to stand out, and so when we think about that in terms of faces, um, everyone has a unique quality to their face. You can look and recognize someone, um, especially if you know them after a while. There's something in our brains that makes that stand out to us. There's things that we're attracted to, um, just depending on the person. Um, in the second line, I like the ideas of petals on a wet black bough. Um, Flower petals, if I think of like a flower, traditionally the first thing that comes to mind are like bright, vivid colors. There are flowers that are a little bit more darker. I buy my son these black flowers every year that I really like. They look really velvety, but they're not necessarily, the brightest colors. Um, but thinking about whites and yellows and reds and purples, these are ones that stand out a little bit. And when you put that juxtaposed to like a darker surface, it makes them stand out all the more. Ways that I think about this also is when I bought a ring for my wife. It came in a velvet box, and the material was darker, and it made the ring pop and stand out more. So when I think about this, and he is describing this instance of seeing these faces and just kind of recognizing it, I think that kind of ties into this kind of the apparition, this sudden appearance of these faces, that he just starts to notice this, and they stand out all of a sudden. So, with images, there's so much that we could dig into this, and I think what he does in these 2 lines says a lot more than if he had just kept his original 30 lines. So, anyways, let's move on here, guys. So like I said here, imagery again does not have to tie in just directly to the visual component. We all have, our typical senses. So you got visual, auditory, tactile, but then you have gustatory and olfactory. Okay, our taste and our smell. But it doesn't even have to be limited to that. There's some sensations that we experience that you could maybe take a little bit beyond that. The feeling of pain, for instance, that can be emotional pain, that can be physical pain. The feeling of getting goosebumps on your skin, clearing your throat, clenching your throat if you're thirsty, even just perceiving something, like feeling like someone's there. Okay, I put this image from The Sixth Sense because I thought it was kind of funny that some of us, can see ghosts if we wanted to. Okay, so let's look at an example here. So the last part of this lesson is going to be looking at haikus. There's a few rules with haikus that we can go over, but I think the thing that I really like about haikus and why they're so beneficial is they have to depend so much on image to convey a meaning. So this one is called The Piercing Chill I Feel. So it says, "The piercing chill I feel, my dead wife's comb in our bedroom under my heel." There's a lot to think about in this, okay? And we might start with just some general questions. What happened to his wife? How did she pass away? Okay, it's not just his wife's comb, it's his dead wife's comb, and it's under his heel. What causes the piercing chill? Is it because the comb reminds him of her, or he broke it, or maybe he feels guilty because she somehow passed away because of him. As I relate this idea to myself, I've had stuff like, I had a great aunt pass away, and she left me just some things, and I ended up getting her driver's license. And I remember I was digging through an old drawer that I hadn't looked in a long time, and it popped up, and it just, made me sad again to find her old driver's license again, because I had missed her, and it had been a while since I had talked to her. Many years, in fact. And so I can relate to that idea of this piercing chill, this sense of loss. That's one way of looking at it, this piercing chill of losing someone. Or it could be that piercing chill of, this comb was put away before, but why is it here now? Okay. It could be this sense of, I'm not alone, or there's someone watching me. Okay. I mean, there's all these questions that we could look under. This could be, an accidental thing. I don't think someone purposely goes through and steps on something, if they can avoid it. So it's this kind of surprise and this, why is this here? Or, maybe the room is in disarray. There's just so many things that we can imagine going on, and what elicits this. Again, I've had students in the past say, well, maybe this guy killed his wife, or, maybe she just recently passed away, or maybe she had passed away a long time, or maybe this is his last relic of her, and, to step on it is, kind of an insult. I have a friend whose spouse passed away, and, he holds on to things of hers that, normally he would have tossed. Like, I think the other day I found he still had an old pumpkin from Halloween, and it was still fine. But I said, why don't you just throw this thing away? And he said, well, I would, but that's, one of the last things that my wife grew that I still have. And, it's just something that he kept around. He'll throw it away when it goes rotten, but that was just something that, he kept around. So as you look at this poem, I brought in all these experiences to help me interpret this of what I think, and you guys could do the same thing. Let's look at some of these other ones. Okay. Just a little background on haiku, since you guys are actually going to write one for me. Haikus are, I think, were traditionally a game done in Japan. Oftentimes I think they were done to spark longer poems, but they became an art form of themselves. Again, haikus very much depend on imagery to make sense. Okay, not all of them are strong on that, but at least traditional ones. They don't typically have a rhyme. They're going to be 17 syllables. They'll be written in 3 lines, so you can see here this way. And they'll have 5 syllables in the first, so my bed is so warm, that's 5. My alarm clock is so cold, 7. I think I'll sleep in. Okay. 5, 7, 5. Haikus look at the literal world, so they're not going to be so mystical. They'll just be look at the wonder that's already around us. And they don't really elicit a ton of feelings. Like this one has maybe a little bit more feeling, but I think this one was just done by a student. But I think the idea is kind of funny. My alarm clock is so cold, so I think I'll just stay sleeping in bed. I like that comparison of hot and cold here, those adjectives. And I wouldn't say that the alarm clock is, necessarily like cold to the touch, but just the idea of I don't want to get out of bed when I'm so warm and cozy here. So, yeah, seasonal indicators. So a lot of times they have to deal with blossoms, snow, leaves, but not all. Let's look at this one. I like this example. The falling flower I saw drift back to the branch was a butterfly. And that one seems simple enough, but I think the idea of the imagery here is thinking something is something else, and it draws your attention. How much in life do we go through that we just kind of half look at something or don't even pay attention to it until we notice something odd happen with it, and then it can draw our attention. And there's just a lot of images that way that we can look and see unique aspects if we would just take the time. How many times would people, take the time to notice a butterfly, landing on a flower? So that's something that this haiku does for me. It reminds me to notice. A lot of times haikus can juxtapose images that seem in contrast to each other and give us pause in our thoughts. This one is rain shower from the mountain. I really like this one. It says rain shower from mountain, quickly soaking barbed wire fence. And I love these two images, placed side by side. When I think about like a shower from a mountain, it seems like a peaceful, pleasant thing. But then to see it against like an industrial, barbed wire fence. Internment camps, if you're not familiar with that, was during World War II. Many Japanese Americans were put into camps as a way for the government to keep an eye on them, I suppose. There was a lot of fear about spies and things during that time. It's a pretty big blight on America's history. Like we've even had a few camps here in Idaho. They're all disbanded by now, but this poem itself, I think it's so sad that something so beautiful put against this something that is encasing. You have barbed wire fence keeping you inside. Okay, yeah, I think there's a lot that we can think about juxtaposing these two ideas of this beautiful rain versus this confining, barbed wire fence. Here's another one. War Foresters from California. War Foresters from California. No ripples this day on desert lake. A lot of times these camps were established outside of cities. If it's in Idaho, we have a lot of desert up here. And so just this idea of being away, that we had to leave. And I like this idea of a ripple, because a ripple can be so symbolic of, what effect are we causing, who's being attentive to this. You watch a ripple and you see it spread and grow, but on the lakes that they're at, there's nothing to it. It's just sand and dry. And I think that there's a lot that we can think about that, like what effect is this causing? What impact am I making on the world here? Okay, I think that's a very somber and almost discouraging image to think about, that you're not making a ripple, that you're forgotten about. Okay, so some haikus, the modern ones, are not going to follow that traditional 5-7-5 pattern. I would like you guys to do that for your poems that you do for me, but I like some of these ones. Making jazz swing in 17 syllables ain't no square poet's job. This one I really like. Visitor's room. Visitor's room, everything bolted down except my brother. I think there's a lot of questions that we could have from this. What sort of places have visitors' rooms? So, especially places that stuff is bolted down. So, stuff that immediately comes to mind are like prison visitor rooms or psych wards. Everything is bolted down except my brother. Like, why is this person here? Why are they visiting their brother? I think there's a lot of questions that we could consider. There's deeper philosophical things we could go into. Why is the brother free but yet confined? Okay, so images can do a lot of stuff that way. Can give us some thought that way. I like these ones. You have the last haiku. It says, no, wait a minute, I can't be old already, I'm just about to. Now that one doesn't necessarily convey like a ton of image. I think the idea of being old certainly has some things tied to it. I love the idea of I'm just about to, and then it stops abruptly. That could ask, why is that happening? What does it mean to be old, etc. I also like this one, the lazy man's haiku. Out in the night, a wheelbarrow full of moonlight. In this case, why would a wheelbarrow be full of moonlight? It's because maybe there's nothing in it. It could be a sign that the person has not done any work that day. It's just an empty wheelbarrow, not holding anything like it should, but yet it could still hold moonlight, so just that light thing. So I think those two are kind of funny. Okay, and I think the rest of this we can be done with for now. Just a quick review here, guys. It's important that when you're analyzing imagery that you look at the key images and the order which they appear. Images are going to tie into our five senses, but a lot of times those five senses are going to be tied to our experience. So for instance, the example I talked about with an apple, if you've never seen or tasted an apple before, a description of it might not be as clear to you. And so that's not necessarily your fault, but I think the best we can do is just tie into our own experience, and that's all a poet can ask of you. You think about key adjectives, qualifying words. Okay, how do they describe things? Think about what emotional attitudes that you have towards each image. Do you have some sort of feeling towards it? And all of us do. I know some of you might say I'm neutral on this, but that's still a feeling. If you have a bunch of images that relates to school, some of you might be a little bit more negative on that, or you have images about Disneyland, you might have a more positive connotation. You might think about why these images are being placed side by side or what connection they have. Even just the order that they're put in, like I said before, is almost as important as the image themselves. So for instance, if Ezra Pound had said petals on a wetback bough faces, the apparition of these faces in a crowd, that might have changed the significance of the poem. Okay. You think about the mood, like what mood is being conveyed by these images. How is it making you feel? What are you imagining? Okay. Even just looking at the title. Okay. So we looked at the lazy man's haiku. I think that added a lot more to the aspect of why is there moonlight in the wheelbarrow. If the guy's lazy, it's probably because he didn't use that wheelbarrow for any work. Okay. So that's what I have for you guys. Thank you for your patience, and I will let you get to it.